The Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Author, Abigail Shrier. Year of publication, 2020. Published by Regnery Publishing. The Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, by Abigail Shrier, is a book that delves into the rising trend of teenage girls identifying as transgender. Shrier explores the social, cultural, and medical implications of this phenomenon, questioning whether it represents a genuine expression of gender identity or a social contagion fueled by peer influence, online communities, and the broader cultural environment. Introduction: The new transgender phenomenon. The book begins with an overview of the rapid increase in the number of teenage girls identifying as transgender. Shrier notes that historically, gender dysphoria, a condition where a person experiences distress due to a mismatch between their biological sex and gender identity, was rare and typically affected boys. However, in the past decade, there has been a sharp rise in the number of adolescent girls seeking gender transition, which Shrier refers to as a transgender craze. Social contagion and peer influence. A significant portion of the book is dedicated to the concept of social contagion, where Shrier argues that the increase in transgender identification among teenage girls is driven by peer influence rather than a genuine realization of gender dysphoria. She cites numerous anecdotes and case studies of young girls who suddenly begin identifying as transgender after their friends do or after becoming immersed in online communities that promote gender transition as a solution to feelings of alienation or discomfort with their bodies. Shrier suggests that these girls, many of whom do not have a history of gender dysphoria, are influenced by a combination of social media, peer groups, and activist ideologies that portray gender transition as a path to happiness and self-fulfillment. She argues that in some cases, these influences may be leading girls to make irreversible decisions about their bodies, such as undergoing hormone therapy or surgery, without fully understanding the long-term consequences. The role of online communities. The book also examines the role of online communities, particularly those on platforms like Tumblr, Reddit, and YouTube, in fostering the transgender identity among teenagers. Shrier argues that these communities often glorify and romanticize the idea of being transgender, offering vulnerable teenagers a sense of belonging and identity. However, she also expresses concern that these communities can pressure young people into making life-altering decisions without adequate support or guidance. Medical interventions and ethical concerns. One of the most contentious aspects of Irreversible Damage is Shrier's critique of the medical community's approach to treating transgender youth. She argues that many medical professionals are too quick to affirm a young person's transgender identity and to recommend medical interventions such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and even surgery. Shrier questions whether these interventions are being offered with sufficient caution, particularly given the potential for irreversible physical and psychological effects. Shrier is particularly critical of the affirmation model of care, which prioritizes validating a young person's expressed gender identity, sometimes at the expense of exploring underlying psychological issues. She raises concerns about the lack of long-term studies on the effects of these treatments, especially when administered to adolescents, and suggests that the medical community may be failing to adequately weigh the risks against the benefits. The impact on families. Throughout the book, Shrier highlights the impact of this trend on families, particularly parents who are often caught off guard when their daughters announce their transgender identity. She shares stories from parents who feel marginalized or dismissed by medical professionals and educators when they express concerns about the speed or appropriateness of their child's transition. Shrier argues that many parents feel powerless to protect their children from what they see as a potentially harmful social trend, exacerbated by a medical and educational establishment that they believe is too quick to affirm a transgender identity. Cultural and ideological forces. Shrier also examines the broader cultural and ideological forces that she believes are contributing to the rise in transgender identification among teenage girls. She critiques what she sees as the influence of gender ideology in schools, media, and popular culture, arguing that it promotes a narrow and sometimes misleading understanding of gender identity. Shrier contends that this ideology encourages young people to view gender as entirely fluid and socially constructed, leading some to identify as transgender when they might instead benefit from other forms of support or exploration of their feelings. The call for caution and exploration. In her conclusion, Shrier calls for a more cautious and exploratory approach to gender dysphoria in young people. She advocates for greater emphasis on mental health support, the exploration of underlying psychological issues, and the provision of a broad range of options for adolescents experiencing distress about their gender. Shrier argues that society must find a balance between supporting transgender individuals and protecting vulnerable young people from making irreversible decisions that they may later regret. Reception and controversy. Irreversible Damage has been highly controversial, receiving both praise and criticism. Supporters of the book argue that Shrier raises important questions about the rapid rise in transgender identification among teenage girls and the role of social and cultural influences in shaping these identities. They appreciate her call for a more cautious approach to medical interventions and her focus on the potential risks of these treatments. However, critics have accused Shrier of promoting harmful stereotypes and fear-mongering about transgender people. Some have argued that the book dismisses the experiences of transgender youth and could contribute to stigmatization and discrimination. The book has been the subject of significant debate, with some advocating for its censorship or removal from bookstores, while others defend it as an important contribution to the conversation about gender identity. Conclusion: a provocative contribution. Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier is a provocative and contentious examination of the rise in transgender identification among teenage girls. Through a combination of personal stories, case studies, and cultural analysis, Shrier raises concerns about the role of social contagion, peer influence, and medical practices in shaping these identities. While the book has sparked significant debate and controversy, it has also brought attention to the complexities of gender dysphoria and the challenges faced by families navigating this issue. In summary, Irreversible Damage offers a critical perspective on the contemporary understanding of gender identity, urging caution and careful consideration in the treatment of transgender youth. The book's impact on the ongoing conversation about gender, identity, and medical ethics continues to resonate, with both strong support and opposition from various quarters.